In our last video, we checked out the situation involving Bob Menery and the Full Send podcast, and the reasoning behind his removal, as well as his initial reaction to it all. We'll be looking further into this and seeing what the Full Send team have said about it, if anything at all. So be sure to stick around to the end of the video so you don't miss out on any key information. Welcome back to LoafTube. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and switch on the notification bell to receive updates on new celebrity videos. Let's jump right into the video and find out the Full Send team's response to Bob Menery's departure from the podcast. Multiple reasons Bob Menery was kicked off Full Send podcast. In the previous video, we discussed the accused reasoning being that Bob Menery was causing a scene at the John Shahidi wedding, aka the president of Happy Dad Seltzer, and that his girl Summer Shiki was seen making out with media mogul Nick Ritchie, to which he responded with, "Bob Menery getting fired from Full Send podcast has nothing to do with Summer Shiki and myself. Please stop. I wish Bob the best. He needs rehab." Although 9 hours ago, a fan DM'd Bob Menery and asked the question, "You got kicked off Full Send because you went psycho at John's wedding over Summer?" To which he responded, "This is maybe the greatest comedic rumor of all time. Kind of sick of it. I left Full Send, plain and simple, after being pushed out of basically everything. End of story." From Bob's point of view, it seems that the Full Send team just used him for his connections. And once they built a foundation for the podcast, they realized they didn't need him. Because, no offense to Bob, he seems like a handful to deal with. Which I could definitely see why Bob feels a type of way towards them now, as it can come across as slimy behavior for sure. There were a few comments on the previous video where you guys want NELK to answer with posts like, "NELK has to address this." And I feel like eventually they will, because surely they're getting asked every day and getting DMs wondering why Bob was kicked off. Or did their fans really not like him that they're not even asking? As we checked out in the previous episode, Bob Menery launched a podcast called Ripper Magoo's, and also wants to get started in the seltzer market, which seems like a ploy to just compete with NELK. Although the podcast doesn't seem to be going very well, as he hasn't posted a new episode in a while, and someone tweeted out, at Bob Menery, "What's up with the Ripper Magoo's podcast? No new episodes? If the people don't hold you accountable, who will? Ghost hunting instead of grinding pods?" I've actually yet to listen to his new podcast, but if any of you watching have, let people know in the comments down below. Is it promising? And could it eventually compete with the Full Send podcast? Does Bob Menery have beef with NELK boys? Bob Menery has spoken out previously about his disagreement with Mark Wahlberg, insisting that there's no bad blood between the Hollywood actor's recent refusal to return his calls and texts. Forgeard, the creator of NELK, stated on the Full Send podcast that Bob burns a lot of bridges, and he inquired as to which particular bridges Menery believed he had particularly damaged. The fact Kyle clearly stated Bob burns a lot of bridges on the podcast shows it was inevitable that they were wanting to eventually kick him off, because the speed the Full Send podcast is growing at, burning bridges would be very damaging in the long run, so it was a clear business decision. Menery acknowledged that his relationship with Mark was the bridge he had burned the wisest. Kyle continued by mentioning that Mark Wahlberg could have had appeared on the podcast if it wasn't for Bob's antics. They wanted Wahlberg to join the podcast since he was getting ready to release a new movie. On Mark Wahlberg's golf course, Bob then got into a fight with a close friend of Wahlberg's. Forgeard claims that after getting into an altercation and getting one of his pals fired, he hounded Mark Wahlberg by text and phone, utterly wrecking their friendship. Bob surmised that Kyle had slightly embellished the story before describing what had happened. Everything seemed to be going well from reading out all their texts, but eventually Mark just stopped replying to a resolute Bob. Bob responds on his Ripper Magoo's podcast. Bob Menery, "Bro, for that Full Send podcast, I built the fucking thing with Kyle. You know I built it. There's no debate there. We brought in, like I said, I gave my all. When I talked to Kyle too about doing this show originally, I wanted to be able to help bring the show and them more mainstream. You know, because they had their prank videos, and they were obviously evolving into the seltzer stuff and all that different stuff. My honest opinion? I think that the show is not going to be worse. It's just going to be different now that we already have. Here's the thing about their guest situation. They're going to be able to get whoever the fuck they want going forward because we already built the blueprint of it all. We built the backbone of it. I can see from both points of view. As for Bob, he clearly felt used and spat out once they didn't need him anymore. Whereas, with all the bridges Bob burns, it would affect the Full Send brand in the long run 100%. Be sure to leave your thoughts on it all in the comment section down below. This concludes today's video. Be sure to subscribe to LoafTube for future celebrity videos and turn on that post notification bell so you don't miss out on any future uploads. Until then, see you in the next one.